Hey.
All right, it's loading up, so it'll be ready in like 20 seconds, and then you can just start, Dana. Thanks.
All right.
All right, you're live.
All right, brothers and sisters. Well, here we are studying the book of Isaiah. And we have a chance, and I hope it's valuable to not only listen to the prophecies, which is the word of God and valuable in itself, but also to see the life of Isaiah being transformed by the very visions that he's seeing. We're in a section of Isaiah chapters 7 through 12, which is called the Immanuel Prophecies. Some scholars even call this the Book of Immanuel, that is from chapters 7 through 12, which we're trying to explain as we're going along here. And we're into the second section where we're going to talk about the secret of Immanuel. And that's the latter half of chapter 7, which we stopped in the middle of last time, through the end of chapter 8. As we remember, these whole things together are called the Immanuel prophecies because Immanuel, God with us, is somehow in the middle of this prophecy, whether prophesied, whether visible, or whether invisible. And so we get to see some further insights into what prophecy is spiritually and in its fulfillment. Of course, after his heavenly vision in chapter 6, Isaiah saw more revelations. Isaiah's point of view, POV, is under Jehovah's sovereign throne. It's a new point of view. He had a different position at different times, but now he's definitely seeing things from under that throne. That makes a lot of difference, you know. And we see tonight in Isaiah chapter 6, he saw such a vision of God. It was so comprehensive. If you could imagine seeing this vision, which I don't know how long you think that vision actually lasted, it may have only been a few minutes. But within that time, he saw the Lord in three ways: the King Adonai, that means Lord Adonai, the Holy One, Kadosh, which we've talked about, and Jehovah of hosts. He's seen God in these three ways. The King Adonai means the enthroned master, the Holy One being the absolute unique, that like no other, and Jehovah of hosts being a warrior, a king who is set for battle, even upon his horse, as it were, you know. And then last week we saw Isaiah 7:14, where another revelation of God was added to those three, namely Immanuel, God with us. Now tonight in Isaiah chapter 8, we're going to see the secret of Immanuel. It'll be revealed in some measure as Jehovah of hosts is shown to rule, albeit invisibly, yet truly upon this earth. So that's where we're going tonight. So in Isaiah 7 through 12, we have three successive prophecies revealing more of Immanuel. Isaiah 7:14, a child will be born and his name will be called Immanuel. We see the nature of the human Messiah's coming as being miraculous, which of course was fulfilled in our Lord Jesus. Then in Isaiah 9, verses 6 and 7, the Messiah will come. For unto us a child is born, and the government shall be upon his shoulders, and his name shall be called a Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God. So he will come with grace and divine power, this Immanuel. It's fleshed out now in the prophecy in chapter 9. And then finally in chapter 11, the third major Immanuel prophecy, as it's called, in the millennium, the Messiah's rule will spread out over all the earth by the Spirit of Immanuel, the spirit of wisdom and knowledge and fear of the Lord, and so on and so forth. So we have a lot yet to see about Immanuel, but chapter 8 is actually something that lies in between. So last time we looked at this amazing prophecy. Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, a virgin will be with child and bear a son, and she will call his name Immanuel. Now we remember contextually the main reason for this prophecy was that before the child could grow up and take his bar mitzvah, the enemies that are threatening Judah will be done away with. And there we got up in the right corner there, Tickle Me Pleaser. Next to him is Rezin, the king of Syria. Down below him is Pikachu, the king of northern Israel. And there, of course, with the astronaut outfit, there is Ahaz, who's scared to death. So the Lord gave him a sign and said that don't worry, don't be afraid of these attacking kings, because before a child can grow up, these kingdoms will be done away. Of course, we know that the prophecy of Isaiah 7:14 was much more important as a sign of the Messiah's eventual coming in salvation history. So many years later, of course, this extraordinary sign was confirmed by Micah, by the way, who also spoke of that strange seed that would have no immediate fulfillment, but a fulfillment eventually that would come in the birth of the Messiah when Jesus was born. And in Matthew chapter 1, we see that the prophecy of Immanuel was fulfilled 750 years later, when the Virgin Mary conceived and bore a son. Now, tonight's section takes us through 5 brief divisions. The first one, would be the end of chapter 7, verses 17 through 25, where Jehovah speaks to Ahaz the king specifically of the coming judgments upon Israel and Syria, those two nations attacking him. In chapter 8, beginning in verses 1, he suddenly turns now away from Ahaz, who won't receive the prophecies, who's trusting in Assyria, and he turns instead to Judah and to Jerusalem. That's his home territory. And Jehovah gives Judah and Jerusalem a warning sign of Assyria's overwhelming power. And then in verses 5 through 10, Isaiah prophesies that Assyria will overflow both Israel and most of Judah. And then verses 11 through 18, the Lord's hand presses hard upon Isaiah and the remnant to trust him alone in the day of Assyria. And then the final couple of verses there in chapter 8 ends, for the rest of the house of Jacob that are not believing, that are not faithful, the day of Assyria will bring despair and darkness. So that's where we're going tonight. And you see, there's a wave all the time. There's a wave of hope, and there's a wave of judgment. There's a great military and political consequence to the prophecies, and there's personal application to the prophecies. And so these things, as we see, all prophecy has much greater depth than just some simple fulfillment. Now, when we come to the first section here, in Isaiah 7:17 through 25, here we have Jehovah speaking through Isaiah to Ahaz of the coming judgments upon northern Israel. Here we see how it opens in verse 17. The Lord will bring upon you and upon your people and upon your father's house such days as have not come since the day that Ephraim departed from Judah, the king of Assyria. So let's parse this out. There's days coming that are going to be days of real upheaval. There hasn't been such upheaval since the one kingdom split, since David and Solomon's kingdom split into northern, which is called Ephraim here, and Judah, the southern kingdom. And what will the Lord bring upon them? The king of Assyria. I've kind of increased the font on that just to try to describe how Isaiah would somehow pronounce those words so strongly. So this is now the day of the ascendancy of the Assyrian Empire. And Jehovah's going to use Assyria as a disciplining instrument for both kingdoms of Israel, both northern Israel and Judah. And Judah and Ahaz has already aligned himself with Assyria. Of course, he thinks he's safe because of that. Of course, we're going to see that he's not safe at all. And so these days, the days of what we're called the day of Assyria. Now, this gives us an opportunity to see an example of near fulfillment of prophecy which also hints at a greater fulfillment in the day of Jehovah. The day of Assyria, the day of Jehovah. And in this prophecy, from here right throughout chapter 8, the day of Assyria, God has chosen to use Assyria as his instrument of judgment in the day of Assyria. Those verses there, verse 17, 18, 20, 21, 23, all talk about the day, the day, the day. And we know day means not a day, but a period of time where Assyria is in the ascendancy as well, in this case, the conqueror. God will send plagues of infestations over Israel and Judah as a precursor to the plagues of the fifth trumpet in the final fulfillment of the day of the Lord. You see what I'm saying? You see parallels in these kind of prophecies. The present day of Assyria, there's going to be flies and bees. In the latter days, in Revelation 9, those creatures that come out of the ground, those locusts that have heads of horses and so on. I mean, the infestation is going to be much worse. Number 3, with all of his instruments that he uses, God sets limits upon his agents, and he'll punish them when they do beyond their appointment. God appoints them to go so far and no further, but in almost all the cases where he uses an instrument, Babylon will be the same. They go beyond their commission, and so God deals with them. Isaiah chapter 10, verses 12 and 13 says this, "Therefore it shall come to pass, when the Lord has performed all his work on Mount Zion and on Jerusalem, that he will say, I will punish the fruit of the arrogant heart of the king of Assyria, and the glory of his haughty looks. For he says, by the strength of my hand I have done it, and by my wisdom, for I am prudent. Also I have removed the boundaries of the people, and have robbed their treasures. So I have put down the inhabitants like a valiant man." So the days are going to come of Assyria's punishment for going beyond the disciplining instrument to be and just being a brutal murderer, as it were. So we see these things. And the fourth example of this, by contrast, on the final day of Jehovah, instead of using an agent, an instrument, he himself, the Lord, will come down in judgment. And again, I don't know if you can renew your mind about this, but judgment always involves two things, weal and woe. It involves reward and punishment. So when we worship our God, the great judge, we cower in fear because of his judgments, but we also realize that he always comes in judgment with reward in his hands. You'll see that many times in the Bible. He comes to judge with his reward in his hands, right? Okay. Now, in this first section here regarding the day of Assyria, we see 3 pictures of judgment. It says in verse 18, "It shall come to pass in that day the Lord will whistle for the fly that is in the farthest part of the rivers of Egypt." And then he's going to whistle for the bee that is in the land of Assyria. "And they will come and they'll rest in the desolate valleys, in the clefts of the rocks, and on the thorns and in the pastures." So God's going to send an infestation up from Egypt, those pesky flies. You know, in Egypt they have those flies that bite, and then from the northeast down are going to come bees. And Assyria was known, and this whole Mesopotamian valley was also very fertile, and they had great bees and honey. Honey was a big part of Assyria. Anyway, these stinging bees are going to come down and just sting Judah up and Syria up, because this is what his judgment's going to be pictured like. And not only that, he's going to send his razor. And that same day the Lord will shave with a hired razor. That's Assyria. "With those from beyond the river, the king of Assyria, the head and the hair of the legs, and will also be removed, and he'll also remove the beard." So everything goes. God's going to lay hold of Pekah and Rezin and shave off their authority, their independence, and their priesthood in one fell swoop. Boy, this is some agent of judgment and of discipline. And of course, just picture this now. Here's Israel. Now here's Assyria and here's Egypt. And you know what? Israel became kind of like a battlefield where these two kingdoms played chess. They conquered some cities. Sometimes Egypt came up and stole some cities. And then down came Assyria, and he would take Lachish and a couple other cities. They were fighting back and forth. Jerusalem usually stayed out of it. It was too well protected. But these flies were coming up. These bees were coming up. And this is going to be your history, Israel. This is what you have to look forward to. So he speaks of this Assyrian invasion that devastates Galilee. Now, some of you have been to Galilee, and if you haven't, you are missing an opportunity to go to one of the most fertile crescents in the world. This place is just full. When you go there on a visit today, you'll see bananas growing and all kinds of fruit and wheat. I mean, Galilee is just so fertile. But by the time these judgments come through with these flies and bees, Galilee will become depopulated because the people will be captured and carried away, uncultivated, full of briars and thorns, vineyards, hedges stripped, and their vines destroyed, uninhabitable and dangerous waste places for many years. That's the sum of what is recorded in verses 21 through 25. This beautiful territory and these beautiful people will all be gone. It'll be a deserted place where just some wild ox or some animals will be hidden in the briars and living there, but uninhabitable for human beings because gone to seed because of disuse and no cultivation. And we come to part 2. Now the Lord has dealt and spoken to Ahaz, who's not listening, and to the people. And now the Lord turns and he sets his sights on Judah and Jerusalem. That's their country, with a warning of Assyria's overwhelming power. There is going to be a speedy judgment. This is the first warning, as it were. Now, Jehovah commanded Isaiah to make a large public sign. You notice in verse 1. Moreover, the Lord said to me, take a large scroll, write on it with a man's pen concerning Maher Shalal Hashbaz. So he wrote out Maher Shalal Hashbaz, which just means haste, fast to the booty, fast to the spoil. And then he says, I want you to take these 2 faithful witnesses and have them sign it, that this is what I say. Before it happens. You get the point, right? And then I want you to take your prophetess, that's his wife. Isn't it wonderful? If a man's a servant of God, his wife gets in on it too. So you take your prophetess and have a child, and his name shall be Maher Shalal Hashbaz, just to back up the signing statement. Now I want a living testimony of this. And here is the sign in verse 4. Before the child shall have knowledge to cry, Abi or Emi, the riches of Damascus and the spoil of Samaria will be taken away before the king of Assyria. Fast to the booty, fast to the spoil. Maher Shalal Hashbaz. So now, here's Isaiah. He's got 2 sons. One, a son of judgment, hastening to the booty, speeding to the spoil. And one son of mercy, a remnant shall return. Well, that's just a mouthful for Maher. I'm sure they call him something else, Harry or something. But there you go. Now these 2 children were growing up in the midst of a prophecy. And of course, even as he said before the child. So this was approximately maybe 734, 733 BC. 732, Assyria came in and just wiped wiped Damascus and Samaria off the map. As I said, the Lord says, I know the strategy. Just knock off the king and the rest falls down like dominoes. You knock down Rezin and that knocks down Damascus, and that knocks down Samaria, and that knock down Rezin and that knocks down Damascus, and that knocks down Syria. Knock down Piku, and that knocks down Samaria, and that knocks down Israel. So it's going to happen. But the point is, it's going to happen fast. That's the point there of Maher Shalal Hashbaz. Then part 3, verses 5 through 10. Now here is where we come into the secret of Immanuel. Isaiah prophesies that Assyria will overflow both Israel and most of Judah. So Judah thought, oh boy, we're going to escape all this stuff because I've made an alliance with Assyria. Well, it's not going to quite work out that way. In verses 5 through 8, the Lord predicts and prophesies a flood. But listen why. The Lord spoke and said to me again, saying, inasmuch as these people refuse the waters of Shiloah that flow softly. Now there he's speaking to Judah. They have this little stream that forms the pool of Siloam, where Jesus sent the blind man, which Siloam means sent. But because Judah rejected these little silent waters, because of this roaring Euphrates River of Assyria. Oh, Assyria, big, powerful, that's what we need. Forget our little, we're just nothing. We're just a little trickle of water here, So because you've rejected the silent waters of Shiloh, which represent, of course, they goes right underneath the temple, that goes right underneath David's throne into the city, this little stream. Because Judah, because you've rejected that, and northern Israel, because you've trusted and aligned with Rezin and Pekah, Ramaliah's son. Now, therefore, the Lord brings upon over them the waters of the river, strong and mighty, the king of Assyria and all his glory. The man, I want to tell you, that tickle me pleaser was a glorious soldier. He will go up over all his channels, overflow all his banks. He will pass through Judah. He will overflow and pass over. He'll reach up to the neck. And stretching out of his wings will fill the breadths of your land. O Immanuel. So the king of Assyria is going to come like a flood, like the Euphrates River. Okay, you want power? You're not willing to be satisfied with the waters from Shiloh? Here comes the Euphrates. It's going to come right over Syria. It's going to come right down over northern Israel. It's going to flow right into Judah. It's going to start going up. It's going to start flooding up, 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 right to the very neck, which would mean like the top of the walls of Jerusalem. And you remember that's exactly what happened when Hezekiah prayed along with Isaiah, and 185,000 were slain in that night of Assyrian army, and they went home, never to bother the walls of Jerusalem again. But that's another story. But now here is the strange thing, that last little phrase, up to the neck of your land, O Immanuel. What's happened here? The Immanuel secret. Now, since Isaiah 7:14 about having a child whose name is Immanuel, Isaiah's been looking. What does that mean? And during this time it came to pass, he'll see Immanuel during the Assyria invasion. So as Isaiah sees this, he sees these things as visions sometimes, and he explains what he's seeing. As Isaiah saw the vision of the Assyrian army overspreading its wings and flooding over the walls of Zion, even up to the neck, Isaiah suddenly cries out. It's a cry in the Hebrew. Your land, O Immanuel. Wait a minute. What's this? Isaiah sees and declares Zion as your land, O Immanuel. So as Isaiah was under the unseen heavenly throne of Jehovah of hosts, he somehow saw the unseen Immanuel, God with us, barring Assyria from coming over the top of the walls of Zion. God had an interest in keeping Zion, his special place. And so this invisible Immanuel showed that he would be with us. Oh, Immanuel, because after all, it is your land, O Immanuel. What a confession to make. I mean, Ahaz would have said, it's my land. The people would have said, it's our land. Oh, no. See, Isaiah saw right through as he cried out, your land, O Immanuel. So Isaiah's vision, somehow he connects Immanuel with the Lord of hosts. And we know that the Lord of hosts is one of the favorite names of Isaiah uses of the Lord as an example in 8:13, as we'll see. And 10 more times during these Immanuel prophecies, the Lord is called Jehovah of hosts. In other words, the Lord is fighting. This Lord of the armies is with us. He's unseen, but Immanuel is with us. Jehovah of hosts will stop this flood before it reaches and destroys Zion. Well, that's really something. He saw something wonderful, didn't he? So Isaiah's flood, Isaiah in verses 9 and 10, the flood recedes. Listen to this. The spirit of Isaiah's prophecy now changes from a cry for help, your land, O Immanuel, to a bold declaration that all Assyrian efforts to overtake Zion would fail. And of course they did in the end. Listen to what he said. Raise your battle cry. You'll be chatu, shattered. Arm yourselves for battle. You will be chatu. Make your battle plans. You will be chatu. Make bold claims of victory. It will not stand. What an amazing thing to say. He's now challenging Assyria, as it were, by faith. That's who he's talking to, see. Be shattered, O you nations, be broken into pieces. Give ear, all you fair countries. Gird yourselves, but be broken in pieces. Gird yourselves, be broken in pieces. Take counsel together, it won't stand. In other words, suddenly he realizes Jehovah of hosts is with us as Immanuel. Why will Assyria's conquest fail in verse 10? For Immanuel. For God is with us. You see the very end of chapter 8, verse 10? Take counsel together, but it will come to nothing. Speak the word, but it will not stand. For Immanuel. That's what it says in the Hebrew. For God is with us. Now, so what do we say his name, or do we say God with us? It says Immanuel. It means both. God is with him. And Isaiah discovered a secret that he had seen under the throne, that he had heard prophesied regarding the virgin that would conceive. And now he saw, is it possible that God would be with us? Now, by with us, it doesn't just mean, God is, he's around. It means God is really among us, is the idea of Immanuel. In other words, he's down in the midst of Israel, with those in Judah, and with those praying. So this is a concept which we as Christians, we just take that for granted. Yeah, yeah, God's in us. Yeah, Christ lives in us, and he dwells with us, and he's very near to us, and he's our best friend and all that. Believe me, that nothing could be further from the mind of a Jew in 735 BC than that God would be right next to you, working on your behalf. Now we come to part 4. It's very interesting. Now Immanuel is kind of taken over. With this revelation of Jehovah's Immanuel, some things start to change. Jehovah's hand presses hard upon the remnant to trust him alone in the day of Assyria. So we have right here. Listen to what it says in verse 11. For thus says Jehovah, but thus Jehovah spoke to me with mighty power. It says, with a mighty hand, God spoke and instructed me about these things, not to walk in the way of the people. So Jehovah draws near as Immanuel and lays his mighty hand upon Isaiah with crucial instructions for the remnant. Instruction number 1. Trust Immanuel. Do not walk in the way of the people, but trust Immanuel. Listen, first of all, he says, you are not to say it's conspiracy in regard to all the people called conspiracy. Don't entertain conspiracy theories. What's going on? What's Assyria doing? Did Ahaz ally with Syria or Assyria? What can we do? Should we make an alliance with Egypt? All kinds of conspiracy. Isaiah, you caused this. And well, listen, don't entertain conspiracy theories. Oh man, I wish the saints across this world could hear this. There's so many saints who've gone astray with these all kinds of crazy conspiracy theories. Don't entertain conspiracy. Trust Immanuel. Number 2, do not fear what others dread. He says, and you're not to fear what they fear or to be in dread of it. But he tells them now positively what to do. It's Jehovah of hosts, which you should regard as holy, and let him be your fear, and let him be your dread. And then he says, then Immanuel will become a sanctuary. Immanuel will be their hiding place and shelter during that day of Assyria. What a tremendous thought. That the Lord would come in. The Lord come with us right into Isaiah, press him down with his hand in a way and say, now listen, son, now listen. These are very important to hear this in this time. Trust Immanuel. Don't trust all this stuff you hear going on. Trust him. Don't fear what others are fearing. You fear Jehovah. And he shall become a sanctuary to you. Wow. What is Immanuel, God with us? A hiding place and a shelter during the day of Assyria. Wonderful Lord. Wonderful Lord. Now, only trust God with us, he says. But listen to verses 14 to 15. But to both the houses of Israel, that means Israel and Judah, this same Lord that became a shelter will be a stone to strike and a rock to stumble, and a snare and a trap for the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Many will stumble over them, then they will fall and be broken. They will even be snared and captured. Now here it is. Immanuel will be a rock of sanctuary in the day of Assyria, or a snare, a stumbling stone. You'll trip up over this stone every time you walk through Jerusalem. Obviously, when the people refuse to trust Jehovah, then the very way that the Lord can help and keep them being rejected, they will find themselves stumbling and experiencing trouble with every step they take. So it's no mistake, of course, that the Lord uses this and that Paul uses this and that Peter uses this same phrase to talk about in the New Testament when Jews reject their rock. In Luke 20 it says in verse 17 and 18, and he beheld them and said, what is this then that is written? The stone which the builders rejected, the same has become the head of the corner. Whosoever shall fall upon that stone shall be broken, but on whomsoever it shall fall, it will grind them to powder. And Paul in Romans 9:32 and 33, why? Because they sought it not by faith, but as it were by the works of the law. For they stumbled on that stumbling stone. As it is written, behold, I lay in Zion a stumbling stone, a rock of offense, and whosoever believeth on him shall not be ashamed. Now, of course, he's taking in another Isaiah verse and combining it with this word. So here we are. There is Immanuel. What is Immanuel? Well, he's this rock. To those who believe, he's a sanctuary. To those who don't believe, he's an offense and a stumble and a cause of snare and entrapment. It just depends on how we listen when the Lord lays his hand upon us in the day of Assyria. So here is the remnant's Immanuel's secret. Listen to this now. So Jehovah gives them a final exhortation to Isaiah and his disciples. Bind up the testimony, seal the law among my disciples. Now here's the first time we see the remnant. Bind up the testimony, seal the Torah. Let the word get into your heart. Hold these things. What have I told you? What have I prophesied? Bind up that testimony. and hide it. Seal the Torah, the law. Isaiah and the remnant respond in verse 17. I will wait for the Lord, who is hiding his face from the house of Jacob. I will even look eagerly for him. Isn't that amazing? Now here is the response of the remnant. The remnant says, I'll wait on the Lord. Lord, I'll wait upon you. I know you're hiding your face from us, even from us, because of the house of Jacob and their unfaithfulness. But I will look eagerly. I will hope and put my hope in you. I believe that you're going to come through. Why? Oh, Immanuel. And verse 18, he says, behold. So here is the remnant testimony in the day of Assyria. Behold. That means look. The testimony of the remnant. He says, behold, I and the children whom the Lord has given me are for signs and wonders in Israel from the Lord of hosts, who dwells on Mount Zion. What is this testimony of the remnant? We're going to stand through the day of Assyria in Zion as a sign, as a portent in that dark day. Well, this is exactly what the New Testament tells us as we come to the to the end days, isn't it? Their names are a sign. Their names are a portent. What is a portent? A portent is a picture, is a guarantee of something that's going to come. A sign and a portent. Well, look, Shir Jashub, is that a sign? Look, I and the children you've given me are signs and portents. Look, Maher Shalal Hashbaz, he's a sign, he's a portent. Look, Isaiah Yashuyah, what does he mean? Jehovah is our salvation. I'm a sign and a portent. And we stand in Zion and say, the Lord of hosts still dwells in Zion. Wow. Everybody says, well, where is he? I don't see him. Assyria is attacking. Everything's done. But not to these ones who are faithful. You see. We'll just pause for a second. The secret of Immanuel. For the first time in Judah, a remnant of Jehovah's disciples, did you notice that word in verse 16? Are identified and given the promise of Immanuel's unseen presence with them. This remnant is not spared the trials and the judgment. Jehovah is hiding from the sons of Jacob, but somehow they find sanctuary in your land, Immanuel. One can almost imagine them chanting in prayer, God is with us, Immanuel, Immanuel. Whenever a crisis would arise threatening to destroy the city, tremendous, they had faith. They stood for your land, Immanuel. And they would also have to endure the hostility from the house of Jacob for their testimony of Immanuel. Now we come to the last 3-4 verses here in part 5. For the rest of the house of Jacob, the day of Assyria will bring despair and darkness. This is always the choices that we accept, whether we believe or do not believe. So in these verses, we see the coming darkness of the day of Assyria. Warning number 1, there's darkness that will come from consulting with spirits of the dead on behalf of the living. Listen to verse 19. When they say to you, consult the mediums and the spiritists who whisper and mutter, should not a people consult their God? Should they consult the dead on behalf of the living? Second warning, the darkness of counsel from those who do not hold to the Torah and to the testimony. Verse 20, to the law and to the testimony. If they do not speak according to his word, it's because they have no dawn. They live in darkness, you see. Warning number 3. Verse 21. Darkness as they look up vainly to heaven, and in their rage curse God and the king in that day. Listen to this verse. They will pass through the land hard-pressed and famished. And it will turn out that when they are hungry, they'll be enraged and curse their king and their God as they face upward. And that means that they're looking up to God. But God is not answering. And so they're cursing God and cursing the king for all of this distress that has come upon them in the day of Assyria. And then finally, the fourth warning in verse 22. There'll be terror in that day when desperate men look to the earth and idols and are thus driven deeper into darkness. And so it says in verse 22, then they will look to the earth. That means they'll look to idols and the things of this earth. And behold, distress and darkness, the gloom of anguish, and they will be driven away into darkness. So there is a time in the day of Assyria, a time of trouble, and there is a remnant that are standing with God with us, with Jehovah of hosts as their sanctuary. And then there are these unbelievers who are looking to the world and looking to Assyria, looking to Egypt and looking for military stratagems, and then going to spiritists and going to these mediums who raise the dead in order to get some counsel. And their lives spiritually become darker and darker and darker. Well, and so the chapter ends, but we have seen Immanuel's secret. So just here we go. We're at the end now, and I just have a couple of questions, if you want to call it that. Considering the secret of Immanuel, and of course we know this wonderful verse in Psalm 25. The secret of Jehovah is with those who fear him, and he will show them his covenant. My eyes are ever toward Jehovah, the psalmist says. Now the reality of an invisible God being with us is vital in a day of unbelief and worldliness. Number one, have we found that secret place as our sanctuary where we can wait for the Lord who is hiding in these days? Number two, do we believe that Immanuel is Lord of hosts, fighting for his interests against all who oppose? Can we testify perhaps of such a miraculous victory when we cried out, "O Immanuel, this is your land, O Immanuel"? Number three, do we declare our testimony is as signs and portents as we stand, as it were, upon Mount Zion? All right, well, now there are some questions I present to you.